You're embarrassing me, Marcus whispered harshly as I adjusted my dress at the company gala. Just try to blend in and don't say anything stupid. The ballroom fell silent 20 minutes later when CEO Victoria Chen stepped to the microphone and announced, "We're thrilled to introduce our new Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Elena Rodriguez." Marcus's champagne glass slipped from his frozen hand.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
My name is Elena Rodriguez, and for 8 years, I lived as the shadow behind my husband's brilliant career at Nexus Technologies. That evening at the annual company gala, I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom at the Meridian Hotel, watching Marcus work the room with his characteristic confidence. He moved from group to group, his perfectly pressed navy suit commanding attention, his laugh echoing across the marble floors as he charmed clients and executives alike. I smoothed down my emerald green dress, the one Marcus had chosen because it was appropriate but not attention-seeking, and tried to make myself invisible. This was my role at these events, the supportive wife who smiled politely, asked no challenging questions, and never, ever mentioned that I held a PhD in computer science from MIT, or that I'd spent the last decade quietly revolutionizing the very technology that had built Marcus's reputation. "Elena, there you are." Marcus appeared at my elbow, his hand gripping my arm just a little too tightly. "I need you to meet the Henderson Group, but please, just let me do the talking. You know how you get when you try to explain technical things." How I get. As if my attempts to contribute to conversations about the field I'd devoted my life to studying were somehow embarrassing social blunders rather than insights from someone with actual expertise. We approached a cluster of executives near the champagne fountain. Marcus immediately launched into his practiced routine, discussing the latest software innovations with the kind of surface-level knowledge that sounded impressive to those who didn't understand the underlying complexities. "The neural network optimization we implemented last quarter has revolutionized our processing capabilities," Marcus explained to Robert Henderson, the billionaire tech investor whose approval could make or break careers in Silicon Valley. "The algorithm efficiency improvements alone have increased our computational speed by 300%. I bit my tongue, knowing that the revolutionary optimization he was describing was actually a standard implementation that any first-year computer science student could have coded, but this was how it always went. Marcus presented simplified, often incorrect versions of complex concepts, while I stood beside him, the woman with the actual knowledge, expected to nod and smile. "Fascinating approach," Henderson replied, though I could see the slight confusion in his eyes. "What specific machine learning frameworks did you utilize for the neural pathway mapping?" Marcus's confident expression flickered for just a moment. This was exactly the kind of detailed technical question that exposed the gap between his presentation skills and his actual understanding. He glanced at me, not to include me in the conversation, but with that familiar look that meant, "Help me without making it obvious you're helping me." "Well," Marcus began, clearly stalling, while his brain scrambled for an answer he didn't possess. I opened my mouth slightly, ready to provide the lifeline he needed, when Henderson's attention shifted to me directly. "And what's your background, Mrs. Rodriguez? Do you work in tech as well?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. This was my moment to speak, to share my expertise, to be more than Marcus's attractive accessory. But before I could respond, Marcus jumped in with his practiced deflection. "Oh, Elena's my support system," he said with that condescending chuckle I'd grown to hate. "She helps keep me organized at home so I can focus on the big picture stuff. You know how it is, behind every successful man and all that." The group laughed politely, but I caught Henderson's surprised expression. Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe? Or curiosity about why someone would dismiss their spouse so quickly. "Actually," I began, finding a spark of courage, "I have some experience with—" "Elena studied computer science in college," Marcus interrupted smoothly, his hand moving to my lower back in what looked like an affectionate gesture but felt like a warning. But that was years ago. Things have changed so much since then, haven't they, honey? College. He'd reduced my MIT PhD to college as if I'd taken a few introductory courses rather than spending 7 years conducting groundbreaking research in artificial intelligence and machine learning. The casual dismissal hit me like a physical blow. Yes, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Things have changed.
Henderson nodded politely, but I saw him glance between Marcus and me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The conversation moved on to market projections and investment strategies, topics where Marcus felt more comfortable with his MBA-level understanding of business concepts. As the evening progressed, I watched this scene repeat itself over and over. Marcus positioned himself as the brilliant innovator, while I faded into the background, my actual credentials and contributions erased from existence. When Janet Morrison from the venture capital firm asked about the technical specifications of our latest security protocol, Marcus gave a vague answer about cutting-edge encryption methodologies that meant absolutely nothing. When David Chang inquired about our AI implementation strategies, Marcus spoke in buzzwords and corporate jargon that sounded impressive but demonstrated no real understanding of the underlying technology. Each time, I felt a piece of myself disappear. The woman who had published 12 peer-reviewed papers on machine learning algorithms, the researcher who had developed the core security protocols that protected millions of users' data, the innovator whose quiet work in the basement of our home had solved problems that Marcus's entire team couldn't crack. But tonight, in this ballroom full of the most powerful people in our industry, I was just Elena Rodriguez, the supportive wife who kept Marcus organized and stayed quiet when the adults were talking. The irony was suffocating. These people were celebrating innovation and technological advancement, completely unaware that the woman serving them champagne and smiling politely had contributed more to those advances than most of the men in expensive suits taking credit for progress they'd never actually created. As I excused myself to the restroom, I caught my reflection in the ornate mirror above the marble sink. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger, polished, appropriate, completely invisible. I barely recognized the confident researcher who had once presented her findings to packed auditoriums at MIT, who had fielded complex questions from Nobel laureates and held her own in debates with the brightest minds in technology. When had I become this person? When had I allowed myself to shrink so small that my own husband felt comfortable erasing my existence in public? The answer was more painful than the question itself. I had done this to myself. One compromised conversation at a time, one moment of choosing peace over truth, one instance after another of letting Marcus's comfort matter more than my own identity. But as I touched up my lipstick and prepared to return to the ballroom, I had no idea that everything was about to change, that the very invisibility I'd accepted as my permanent role was about to be shattered in the most spectacular way possible. The woman in the mirror didn't know it yet, but she was about to stop being Marcus Rodriguez's embarrassing wife and start being exactly who she'd always been meant to be. When I returned to the ballroom, Marcus was holding court near the main stage, surrounded by a group that had grown to include some of the most influential people in Silicon Valley. I spotted Victoria Chen, Nexus Technologies' CEO, listening intently as Marcus gestured dramatically with his champagne glass. My stomach tightened as I approached the circle, knowing that whatever Marcus was saying probably involved technology he barely understood. The breakthrough came when we realized traditional cloud architectures were fundamentally flawed, Marcus was explaining to the captivated audience. By implementing a distributed ledger system with quantum-resistant encryption protocols, we've essentially solved the scalability problem that's been plaguing the industry for decades. I froze mid-step. Quantum-resistant encryption protocols. That was my research. The paper I'd been working on for 3 years. The breakthrough I'd achieved just last month in our home office while Marcus was at his golf tournament in Pebble Beach. The solution that had kept me awake for countless nights, coding and testing until I'd finally cracked the mathematical proof that everyone said was impossible. "Marcus," I whispered, touching his arm gently, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He barely glanced at me, his attention focused on maintaining his audience's fascination. Not now, honey, we're discussing serious business here. Dr. Amanda Torres from Stanford's Computer Science Department leaned forward with obvious interest. That's remarkable work, Marcus. The quantum resistance problem has stumped our entire department. How did you approach the cryptographic key distribution challenge?
My heart pounded as I watched Marcus's confident expression flicker. This was exactly the kind of specific technical question that would expose his surface-level understanding. The cryptographic key distribution challenge was the core mathematical problem I'd solved, requiring advanced understanding of both quantum mechanics and advanced cryptography. Well, Marcus began, his voice carrying that slight tremor that appeared whenever he was asked to go deeper than his prepared talking points. It's quite complex, as you can imagine. The key is really in the algorithmic approach to the distribution methodology. It was complete nonsense. Buzzword salad that sounded impressive but meant absolutely nothing to anyone with actual expertise. I saw Dr. Torres' eyebrows furrow slightly, her expression shifting from interest to confusion. Victoria Chen stepped closer to the circle, her sharp eyes focused intently on Marcus. As CEO of one of the most innovative tech companies in Silicon Valley, she hadn't built her reputation by being fooled by empty corporate speak. Could you elaborate on the specific mathematical framework you used? Victoria asked, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made boardrooms fall silent. I'm particularly interested in how you addressed the lattice-based cryptographic vulnerabilities. The color began draining from Marcus's face. Lattice-based cryptographic vulnerabilities were part of the advanced mathematical theory underlying my research, concepts that required years of study to truly understand. I had spent 18 months just mastering the foundational mathematics before I could even begin working on the practical applications. I watched my husband's mouth open and close like a fish gasping for air. The confident presenter who had been commanding the room's attention suddenly looked like a student caught cheating on an exam. Marcus, I whispered again, more urgently this time. I could see the disaster approaching like a slow-motion train wreck. Maybe we should. Elena, please, Marcus snapped, his voice sharp enough that several people in the circle turned to look at us. Can't you see I'm trying to have an important conversation here? This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. You're being embarrassing. The words hit me like a slap across the face. Embarrassing, he'd called me embarrassing in front of Victoria Chen, Dr. Torres, Robert Henderson, and a dozen other industry leaders. The woman whose research he was trying to claim as his own was embarrassing him by existing in the same space. The circle fell uncomfortably quiet. I felt heat creeping up my neck as every pair of eyes in the group focused on me with a mixture of pity and awkward discomfort. Marcus had just publicly humiliated his wife at the industry's most important networking event, and everyone had witnessed it. I'm sorry, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to interrupt. But Marcus wasn't finished. Perhaps sensing that he was losing credibility with his inability to answer technical questions, he decided to shore up his authority by further diminishing mine. Honestly, Elena gets excited about these tech discussions because she took some computer classes in college, Marcus said with a dismissive laugh that made my skin crawl. She thinks she understands what we're talking about, but it's really quite beyond her. You know how it is. A little knowledge can be dangerous. Dr. Torres's expression shifted to something approaching disgust. Victoria Chen's face became completely unreadable, but I caught something flickering in her eyes that looked like recognition, or perhaps calculation. I should probably take her home before she tries to join the conversation again, Marcus continued, apparently oblivious to the growing discomfort of his audience. She means well, but she has a tendency to oversimplify complex concepts. Last week she tried to explain quantum computing to me like I was a 5-year-old. The irony was so profound it took my breath away. Marcus was describing quantum computing explanations that I had given him, accurate, detailed explanations that he had clearly misunderstood and was now characterizing as oversimplification. Robert Henderson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should. No, it's fine, Marcus insisted, warming to his theme now that he'd found a topic where he felt confident belittling his wife. Elena's biggest contribution to my work is making sure I eat regular meals and keeping the house quiet when I'm developing new algorithms. She's excellent at the domestic support that keeps brilliant minds focused on innovation. Domestic support. Keeping the house quiet. I stood there in my emerald dress, holding a champagne glass with trembling hands, while my husband reduced me to a glorified housekeeper in front of the most powerful people in our industry.
But it was Dr. Torres who spoke the words that would haunt me for the rest of the evening. How fortunate for you, Marcus, to have such a dedicated support system. Her tone was carefully neutral, but there was something underneath it that sounded like barely controlled anger. Victoria Chen said nothing, but her penetrating gaze moved between Marcus and me with an intensity that made me feel like she was taking inventory of something important. As the group began to disperse, clearly uncomfortable with the dynamic they'd just witnessed, I excused myself once again and headed toward the ladies' room. But this time, I wasn't going to touch up my makeup. This time, I was going to lock myself in a stall and cry for the brilliant woman I used to be before I learned to make herself small enough to fit into Marcus Rodriguez's shadow. I had no idea that Victoria Chen had quietly followed me, or that everything I thought I knew about my life was about to change forever. I stood in the marble-appointed ladies' room, gripping the edge of the vanity counter so tightly my knuckles had turned white. My reflection stared back at me, emerald dress, perfectly applied makeup, and eyes that looked like they belonged to someone who had just watched her entire identity get erased in public. The sound of the main ballroom felt muffled through the heavy doors, a distant reminder of the humiliation I just endured. The door opened softly behind me, and I quickly turned toward one of the stalls, hoping to avoid another awkward encounter with someone who had witnessed Marcus's performance. But the voice that spoke stopped me cold. "Dr. Rodriguez?" I turned slowly to find Victoria Chen standing near the entrance, her expression unreadable, but her tone carrying something I hadn't heard directed at me in years: respect. "Miss Chen," I managed, trying to compose myself, "I'm sorry about the scene out there. Marcus gets passionate about his work and sometimes—" "Stop." Victoria's voice was firm but not unkind. "Don't apologize for him, and certainly don't apologize for existing in the same space where he's discussing your research." My research? The words hung in the air between us like a revelation. Victoria Chen, the CEO of Nexus Technologies, somehow knew that Marcus had been claiming my work as his own. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, carefully, though my heart was racing. Victoria moved closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Dr. Elena Rodriguez, MIT class of 2015, PhD in computer science with a focus on quantum cryptography and artificial intelligence. 12 peer-reviewed publications in the Journal of Advanced Computing, including a groundbreaking paper on lattice-based encryption protocols published just last month under the name E.M. Rodriguez." The breath left my lungs in a rush. She knew. Somehow, Victoria Chen knew exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished, while my own husband introduced me as someone who had taken some computer classes in college. "The paper Marcus was just attempting to describe," Victoria continued, "bears a remarkable resemblance to your published research. Remarkable in that it's nearly identical, except his version lacks the mathematical rigor and theoretical foundation that made your work so compelling." I sank onto the small velvet bench near the vanity, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "You read my paper?" "I read everything published in advanced cryptography," Victoria said, settling gracefully beside me. "It's part of staying competitive in this industry. Your work on quantum-resistant encryption isn't just brilliant, it's revolutionary. It solves problems that companies like mine have been throwing millions of dollars at for years. The validation felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. Someone in a position of power had not only read my work, but understood its significance. Someone who mattered in this industry knew that I existed as more than Marcus Rodriguez's domestic support system. "How long has this been going on?" Victoria asked. "How long has what been going on?" "How long has your husband been presenting your research as his own?" The question was delivered with such matter-of-fact clarity that I found myself answering before I could think to deflect or protect Marcus. 8 years, I whispered, since we got married. It started small. He'd ask me to look over his presentations, help him understand technical concepts he needed to discuss with clients, but gradually it became this. Victoria nodded as if she'd heard this story before. And tonight, when he claimed credit for quantum-resistant encryption protocols? "I developed that algorithm 3 months ago," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I've been working on it for 3 years. The mathematical proof that makes it possible, that's mine. Every line of code, every theoretical framework, every breakthrough that led to the solution, I did that work." In your home office, I imagine, while he was playing golf or attending networking events? The accuracy of her guess was startling. "How did you?" "Because I've seen this pattern before," Victoria said, her voice carrying a hint of steel. "Brilliant women creating innovations in isolation, while men with better networking skills take credit in public forums. It's one of the reasons our industry continues to struggle with diversity and authentic innovation." She stood and walked to the mirror, adjusting her already perfect appearance while continuing to speak. "The difference is that most of those women don't have PhDs from MIT and publication records that make them some of the most promising researchers in the field." "I don't understand what you're saying." Victoria turned back to me, and for the first time all evening, I saw her smile. "I'm saying that Nexus Technologies has been looking for someone to head our new quantum computing division, someone with the expertise to lead cutting-edge research and the vision to translate theoretical breakthroughs into practical applications." My heart stopped. The quantum computing division at Nexus was legendary. Unlimited budget, access to the most advanced equipment in the world, and the kind of resources that could transform theoretical research into world-changing technology. We've been searching for the right candidate for months, someone with both the technical expertise and the innovative thinking to push boundaries that others consider impossible. Tonight, watching your husband struggle to explain concepts that you clearly developed, I realized we've been looking in the wrong places. She reached into her small evening clutch and pulled out a business card, not the standard corporate card that everyone at these events carried, but something more substantial, with embossed lettering that caught the light. "Dr. Rodriguez, I'd like to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer, heading our quantum computing division." The words seemed to echo in the marble-tiled room. Chief Technology Officer. The position Marcus had been angling for his entire career. The role he'd been positioning himself for through presentations built on my research. And Victoria Chen was offering it to me? "I don't know what to say," I managed. "Say you'll think about it," Victoria replied, pressing the card into my palm. "The position comes with a full research team, a budget that would make university researchers weep with joy, and the kind of intellectual freedom that allows brilliant minds to do their best work." She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "Dr. Rodriguez, your husband called you embarrassing tonight, but the truth is, you're the most impressive person in that ballroom. You just need to start believing it yourself." The door closed softly behind her, leaving me alone with a business card that felt heavier than plutonium and the beginning of an understanding that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. In the mirror, I saw a different woman than the one who had entered this room 20 minutes ago. This woman looked like someone who had just been handed the opportunity to step out of the shadows and into the light she'd been generating all along. I slipped Victoria's card into my purse, next to my lipstick and phone, knowing that I was carrying more than contact information. I was carrying the key to reclaiming everything I'd let Marcus convince me I wasn't qualified to own. The question was, did I have the courage to use it? I returned to the ballroom with Victoria's business card burning against my palm like a secret too dangerous to hold. The gala continued around me. Champagne glasses clinking, conversations flowing, deals being struck in corners where power brokers gathered, but everything felt different now. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, observing a world I'd never quite belonged to. But for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I wanted to belong to it anymore. Marcus found me near the dessert station, his face flushed with champagne and satisfaction. He'd clearly recovered from his earlier technical stumble and was riding high on the social momentum that came from working a room full of influential people. "There you are," he said, sliding his arm around my waist with possessive familiarity. "I was wondering where you'd disappeared to. The Henderson Group wants to set up a lunch meeting next week to discuss implementation strategies." Implementation strategies? For my research? My quantum encryption protocols that he'd nearly fumbled explaining to a room full of experts. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. "That's wonderful," I managed, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "You seem distracted," Marcus observed, his grip on my waist tightening slightly. "You're not still upset about earlier, are you? You know I didn't mean anything by it. Sometimes you just need to understand when to let the experts handle the conversation." The experts. As if the woman with a PhD from MIT and 12 published papers wasn't expert enough to discuss the very field she devoted her life to mastering. As if the researcher who had solved problems that stumped entire university departments wasn't qualified to speak about her own work. "Of course," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I understand." But as we made our way through the remainder of the evening, Marcus networking with renewed confidence, me smiling and nodding at appropriate intervals, I found myself studying the faces around us with new eyes. How many other brilliant minds were hidden in this room? How many other women stood beside successful men, their contributions invisible, their expertise dismissed, their identities slowly eroding until they became exactly what Marcus had called me tonight: embarrassing? The taxi ride home was filled with Marcus's excited recap of the evening's successes. He'd secured 3 potential client meetings, made connections with 2 venture capital firms, and apparently convinced several people that he was some kind of quantum computing visionary. "This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for," he said, his words slightly slurred from champagne. "The Henderson Group alone could fund expansion into new markets, and Victoria Chen seemed really impressed with my presentation." Impressed? Victoria Chen had been impressed, all right, just not with the person Marcus thought. "Did you see how she was asking all those technical questions?" Marcus continued, oblivious to my silence. "I think she was testing me, seeing if I really understand the depth of what we're working on. Good thing I've been studying your explanations so carefully." My explanations. He was so close to acknowledging the truth, yet so far from actually understanding it. In Marcus's mind, I was still the helpful wife who provided simplified explanations that he could then transform into brilliant insights. The idea that I might be the actual source of the innovation, rather than just a convenient translator, never seemed to occur to him. When we arrived home, Marcus headed straight for his study to work on some strategic planning while the ideas are fresh. I knew what that meant. He'd spend an hour making notes about the conversations he'd had, trying to piece together enough technical details to sound credible in follow-up meetings. I went to our bedroom and changed out of the emerald dress, hanging it carefully in the closet next to the other, appropriate but not attention-seeking outfits Marcus had selected for various corporate functions over the years. Each dress was a costume I'd worn while playing the role of the diminished wife, and tonight felt like the last performance of a character I no longer wanted to inhabit. Sitting on the edge of our bed in my pajamas, I pulled Victoria's business card from my purse and studied it in the lamplight. The embossed letters seemed to glow with possibility. Victoria Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Nexus Technologies. Below that, handwritten in elegant script, "Call me Monday morning. We have much to discuss about your real future." My real future. Not our shared future, not the future Marcus had planned for us, where I remained his invisible support system. My future, where my name would be on my work, where my expertise would be acknowledged, where my voice would matter. I walked to the window overlooking our backyard, where the small office building Marcus had constructed for his important work stood dark against the night sky. That building, where I'd spent countless hours researching, coding, and developing the innovations that had built his career. Where I'd solved impossible problems while he attended networking events and golf tournaments. Where I'd published papers under my maiden name initial because it felt like the only way to maintain some connection to my true identity. The woman reflected in the window looked like a stranger, someone I'd been before I learned to make myself small enough to fit into Marcus Rodriguez's vision of what a wife should be. Before I'd accepted that my role was to enable his ambitions rather than pursue my own. Before I'd convinced myself that supporting someone else's dreams was the same as achieving my own. My phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Amanda Torres, the Stanford professor who had witnessed tonight's humiliation. "Elena, I hope you're okay after this evening. If you ever want to discuss your research over coffee, I'd be honored. Your quantum encryption work is extraordinary." Another message appeared from Robert Henderson. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I found our brief conversation tonight intriguing. Would you be interested in discussing your background in more detail? I'm always looking for brilliant minds to support." Then another, from Dr. Sarah Kim at UC Berkeley. "Elena, I've been following your publications for years. After tonight, I think we should talk." I stared at the growing list of messages, each one from someone who had seen through Marcus's performance to recognize the truth he'd been trying to hide. These industry leaders hadn't been fooled by his surface-level explanations or impressed by his confident presentation style. They'd recognized that the quiet woman being dismissed as embarrassing was actually the brilliant mind behind the innovations being discussed. The irony was perfect. In his attempt to humiliate me into silence, Marcus had inadvertently exposed the gap between his claimed expertise and his actual knowledge. In trying to make me invisible, he'd made it obvious to everyone with real understanding that I was the source of the innovations he'd been claiming. As I sat in our bedroom, surrounded by the comfortable prison I'd helped construct, I realized that tonight hadn't just been a humiliation, it had been a revelation. Not just about Marcus's willingness to diminish me in public, but about my own willingness to accept that diminishment as normal. For 8 years, I told myself that I was building our future together, that my invisible contributions were investments in our shared success. But tonight had crystallized a truth I'd been avoiding. There was no our in Marcus's vision of success. There was only his ambition, and my obligation to support it while erasing myself completely. Victoria Chen's business card sat on my nightstand like a bridge between the woman I'd become and the woman I'd once been. The question wasn't whether I was qualified for the position she'd offered. My credentials and accomplishments spoke for themselves. The question was whether I had the courage to reclaim the identity I'd been systematically surrendering, one compromised conversation at a time. From downstairs, I could hear Marcus typing enthusiastically on his laptop, probably crafting follow-up emails to potential clients, using technical terms he didn't fully understand to describe innovations he'd never created. But for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't down there helping him translate my expertise into his opportunities. I was upstairs, holding a business card that represented the possibility of finally speaking in my own voice, using my own name, and claiming credit for my own work. The woman in the window reflection was starting to look familiar again. It hadn't always been this way. 10 years ago, Marcus Rodriguez was the kind of man who made conference rooms feel electric just by walking in. I was 28, a newly minted PhD from MIT, and drowning in student loans despite having one of the most promising research careers in quantum computing. I'd been hired as a junior researcher at Pinnacle Labs, a small but prestigious firm that specialized in cutting-edge cryptography for government contracts. Marcus was 32 then, already a senior business development manager with an MBA from Wharton and the kind of effortless charisma that made investors write checks before he'd finished his pitch. When he showed up at our lab to assess the commercial potential of our research, I was hunched over a quantum processor prototype, troubleshooting code that had been fighting me for 3 weeks straight. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said from behind me. I turned around, expecting to see him admiring the quantum computer, a marvel of engineering that represented the future of computational power. Instead, his eyes were fixed directly on me. "The computer or the woman cursing at it?" I asked, pushing my glasses up my nose and suddenly aware that I'd been working for 14 hours straight in the same coffee-stained lab coat. "Definitely the woman," Marcus replied, with a smile that could have powered our entire lab. Though I have to admit, I have no idea what either of you actually does. His honesty was refreshing. Most people who visited our lab pretended to understand quantum mechanics, nodding sagely while we explained concepts that had taken us years to master. Marcus simply admitted he was lost, and somehow that made him more appealing than all the executives who faked comprehension. "I'm trying to solve the coherence problem in quantum cryptography," I explained, finding myself wanting to share my passion with someone who seemed genuinely interested. "Quantum computers can theoretically break any encryption we currently use, but they're also incredibly fragile. The quantum states collapse if you look at them wrong." "So you're basically trying to tame something that's simultaneously all-powerful and incredibly delicate," Marcus said, his business mind already translating technical concepts into broader implications. "That sounds like it could revolutionize everything." "Everything," I agreed, feeling a thrill at his understanding. "Banking, communications, national security, privacy. If we can stabilize quantum cryptographic systems, we can create unbreakable codes, or break the unbreakable ones." That conversation lasted 4 hours. Marcus asked intelligent questions that forced me to think about my research from new angles. He understood the commercial applications in ways that my academic colleagues missed, while I explained the technical foundations that his business experience couldn't provide. We complemented each other perfectly. "You know what you need?" Marcus said as we shared terrible cafeteria coffee at midnight. "A partner who can translate your brilliance into language that investors and clients can understand. Someone who can help you build something bigger than just academic papers." The idea was intoxicating. I'd spent years watching my research colleagues struggle to commercialize their innovations, brilliant minds trapped in the ivory tower because they couldn't navigate business relationships or explain complex concepts to non-technical audiences. Marcus offered something I'd never had, access to the world where my research could actually change things. "Think about it, Elena," he said, his hand covering mine across the table. "We could build an empire together. Your brain, my business sense, unlimited potential." Dating Marcus felt like stepping into a different universe. He took me to investor dinners where I found myself explaining quantum mechanics to venture capitalists who hung on every word. He introduced me to tech entrepreneurs who saw the revolutionary potential in my work. For the first time in my career, I felt like my research might actually escape the lab and transform the world. "You're wasted in that research position," Marcus told me 6 months into our relationship. "Someone with your mind should be running companies, not buried in a lab where nobody sees your genius except other PhD students." When Pinnacle Labs downsized and eliminated junior research positions, Marcus's offer seemed like destiny. He'd started his own consulting firm and needed someone who could provide the technical expertise his clients demanded. "Be my partner," he proposed over dinner at the most expensive restaurant I'd ever entered. Equal partnership, shared success, unlimited possibilities. We'll build something incredible together. The marriage proposal came with a business proposal. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, co-founder of Rodriguez Strategic Technologies. My name on the door, my expertise driving innovation, my research finally reaching its commercial potential. Those first 2 years were everything Marcus had promised. I developed revolutionary cryptographic solutions while he handled client relationships and business development. My algorithms protected financial transactions for 3 major banks. My security protocols defended government communication systems. My innovations generated millions in revenue. But somewhere along the way, the partnership began shifting. Clients started requesting meetings with Marcus alone, saying they preferred to deal with the decision maker. Investment presentations featured Marcus as the visionary leader, while I became the technical consultant. Contract signatures moved from both our names to just his. It's easier this way, Marcus explained when I questioned the changes. Clients feel more comfortable with a single point of contact, and you hate the networking aspects anyway. You're much happier in the lab, developing the next breakthrough. He wasn't wrong. I did prefer research to schmoozing. I was more comfortable with algorithms than investor meetings. But I was also slowly disappearing from my own company, my contributions becoming invisible, even as they drove our success. Trust me, Marcus said whenever I raised concerns. This is just temporary positioning. Once we establish ourselves in the market, we'll restructure everything. Right now, we need to play the game the way investors expect it to be played. The game. As if my expertise was just another strategic asset to be deployed when convenient and hidden when politically necessary. As if the woman with the PhD and the revolutionary ideas was somehow less credible than the man with the MBA and the better networking skills. By our 5th anniversary, I'd become exactly what Marcus introduced me as tonight, the woman behind the successful man. The invisible support system that kept brilliant innovations flowing while someone else claimed credit for their creation. The tragedy wasn't that Marcus had set out to erase me. The tragedy was that I'd participated in my own disappearance, one compromise at a time, convincing myself that supporting his ambitions was the same as achieving my own. But that was before Victoria Chen offered me the chance to remember who I'd been, before I learned to make myself small enough to fit into someone else's vision of success. The systematic erasure hadn't happened overnight. It had been so gradual, so carefully orchestrated, that I'd barely noticed myself disappearing until I was already gone. As I sat in our bedroom holding Victoria's business card, memories flooded back like evidence in a trial I'd never realized was happening. The first major client meeting, where Marcus had introduced me as his research assistant instead of his business partner, I'd corrected him afterward, thinking it was an innocent mistake. "Elena, you have to understand how these old-school investors think," he'd explained patiently. "They're more comfortable dealing with established hierarchies. If they think we're equal partners, they'll assume I can't make decisions without consulting you on everything. It kills the momentum." "But I am an equal partner," I'd insisted. "My name is on the incorporation papers." "Of course you are, but client perception is everything in this business. Let me establish credibility first, then we can adjust the positioning later." Later never came. The research assistant title became technical consultant, then subject matter expert, and finally, just my wife who helps with the technical stuff. Each demotion was presented as a strategic necessity, a temporary adjustment that would benefit our long-term success. The Rodriguez cryptographic protocol had been my masterpiece, a revolutionary approach to quantum-resistant encryption that could protect data even from quantum computer attacks. I'd spent 18 months developing the mathematical framework, coding the implementation, and testing it against every known attack vector. When we presented it to the Department of Defense, it was my breakthrough that earned us a $12 million contract. But somewhere between the initial presentation and the contract signing, it had become the Rodriguez protocol, with Marcus listed as the primary inventor and me relegated to a footnote as technical contributor. "This is how government contracts work," Marcus had explained when I questioned the documentation. "They need a single point of responsibility, someone who can be held accountable for the entire project. You'll still get full credit internally, but externally, it's cleaner if I'm the official lead." Internal credit meant nothing when external recognition determined career trajectories. The protocol won 3 industry awards, generated dozens of licensing deals, and established Rodriguez Strategic Technologies as a leader in quantum cryptography. Marcus spoke at conferences, gave interviews to tech publications, and was profiled in Forbes as the visionary behind next-generation encryption. I watched from the audience as he presented my work to rooms full of experts, using slides I'd created to explain concepts I'd developed. The questions always exposed the gaps in his understanding. Marcus, can you elaborate on the mathematical basis for the lattice reduction algorithms Dr. Jennifer Walsh from IBM had asked during his keynote at the Quantum Security Summit? I'd seen the panic flash across his face, quickly masked by his practiced, confident smile. That's getting quite deep into the technical weeds, Jennifer. I prefer to focus on the practical applications and business implications. The specific mathematical implementations are handled by my technical team. His technical team, meaning me, sitting in the audience, watching him deflect questions about my own work because he didn't understand the mathematics well enough to answer them. After the presentation, I'd approached him backstage. Marcus, when people ask about the technical details, maybe you could... Elena, please, I know you want to help, but these presentations require a specific tone and energy. Your explanations are too academic, too detailed. These audiences need big picture vision, not mathematical proof. Too academic. My PhD-level expertise was too academic for discussions about academic research. My detailed knowledge was inappropriate for explaining concepts I'd invented. My voice was wrong for presenting my own innovations. The pattern extended beyond professional settings. At dinner parties, when conversations turned to technology and current events, Marcus would hold court while I served wine and cleared plates. When neighbors asked about our work, Marcus would launch into explanations of his latest projects while I nodded supportively from the kitchen doorway. Even our friends had absorbed the narrative. Marcus is so lucky to have found someone who understands his work, Sarah Patterson had commented at a barbecue last summer. Most wives just tune out when their husbands talk about technical stuff, but Elena actually gets it. Gets it. As if I were an unusually attentive audience member, rather than the person who'd created the concepts being discussed. The most painful memory was from 18 months ago, when MIT invited me to speak at their annual alumni symposium. They wanted to discuss my research and its commercial applications, specifically recognizing my contributions to quantum cryptography. It would have been my first major speaking engagement under my own name in 3 years. I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus had said when I showed him the invitation. You know how you get when you're nervous, and with everything we have going on with the Henderson project, this isn't the right time to be distracted. But Marcus, this is MIT. They're honoring my research specifically. Our research, he'd corrected. And honestly, Elena, your presentation style is too technical for general audiences. You'd probably confuse people more than enlighten them. Why don't I reach out to them? I could probably present your work in a way that would be more accessible. I declined the invitation. Let Marcus's calendar conflicts and my supposed communication deficiencies take precedence over recognition from my alma mater. Watched another opportunity to speak in my own voice disappear because I'd been convinced that my voice wasn't worth hearing. The final piece of evidence was sitting in my laptop, which I retrieved from the home office Marcus rarely used anymore. I opened the folder labeled Elena Publications and stared at 12 peer-reviewed papers published under my maiden name initials over the past 5 years. Groundbreaking research that had advanced the entire field of quantum cryptography, work that had been cited hundreds of times by other researchers worldwide. None of this work appeared on Rodriguez Strategic Technologies' website. None of these publications were mentioned in Marcus's speaker biographies. My academic reputation existed in a completely separate universe from the company we'd supposedly built together. I was Dr. E.M. Rodriguez in academic circles, a respected researcher whose innovations were shaping the future of cybersecurity. But in the business world, where those innovations generated millions in revenue, I was just Elena Rodriguez, the supportive wife who helped Marcus organize his thoughts and kept the house quiet while he worked. The woman who had solved impossible mathematical problems was considered too academic to explain her own solutions. The researcher whose work protected government communications was deemed too technical to discuss her own innovations. The inventor whose algorithms generated millions in licensing fees was too detailed to present her own discoveries. As I closed the laptop and returned to bed, I realized that tonight's humiliation hadn't been an aberration. It had been the logical conclusion of 8 years of systematic diminishment, the final performance of a character I'd been rehearsing without realizing I was on stage. But characters could be rewritten, and tomorrow I was going to start writing a very different story. The home office had become my sanctuary and my prison. Located in the converted garage behind our main house, it was officially Marcus's strategic planning center, complete with expensive ergonomic furniture and motivational posters about innovation and leadership. But the reality was that I spent more time in that space than he did, hunched over multiple monitors while developing the algorithms and protocols that fueled Rodriguez Strategic Technologies' reputation for cutting-edge innovation. The irony of my invisible labor was profound. While Marcus attended networking lunches and golf tournaments with potential clients, I was solving the technical challenges that made those business relationships possible. While he gave presentations about revolutionary breakthroughs to rooms full of investors, I was in the garage at 2 a.m. debugging code and refining mathematical proofs that would validate his bold claims. My typical day started at 5 a.m., 2 hours before Marcus woke up. I'd slip into the office with my coffee and review overnight messages from international collaborators, researchers at Cambridge, professors at Tokyo Institute of Technology, graduate students at Stanford who were building on my published work. These conversations happened under my academic identity, Dr. E.M. Rodriguez, where my expertise was acknowledged and my insights were valued. By 7 a.m., I'd shift into my domestic role, preparing Marcus's breakfast and listening to his plans for the day. He'd brief me on client meetings and investor calls, often asking for quick technical overviews that would help him sound knowledgeable during business discussions. The Henderson Group is asking about quantum key distribution protocols, he'd say while checking his phone. Can you put together some talking points? Nothing too complicated, just enough to sound like I know what I'm talking about. I'd spend the next hour translating complex cryptographic concepts into digestible bullet points, creating the technical foundation for presentations that would carry Marcus's name and build his reputation as a quantum computing visionary. The most exhausting part wasn't the work itself. I loved the research, the problem-solving, the moment when elegant mathematics solved real-world challenges. The exhausting part was watching my innovations get filtered through Marcus's limited understanding, seeing brilliant solutions reduced to buzzword-heavy marketing speak that missed the actual significance of what had been accomplished. Last spring, I developed a breakthrough in quantum error correction that could extend the coherence time of quantum systems by 400%. It was the kind of advancement that could accelerate practical quantum computing by decades, bringing us closer to solving problems that were currently impossible for classical computers. When Marcus presented this work to the National Science Foundation, he described it as optimizing quantum efficiency parameters through advanced algorithmic enhancement protocols. The language was technically correct, but completely missed the revolutionary implications of what I'd achieved. The NSF reviewers, who were actual experts in quantum mechanics, had asked follow-up questions that exposed the superficial nature of his understanding. Dr. Rodriguez, one reviewer had said during the video call I'd watched from the next room, your error correction approach seems to contradict established decoherence models. How do you reconcile this apparent inconsistency? I'd watched Marcus's confident expression crumble as he realized he was being asked to defend mathematical principles he'd never actually studied. That's an excellent question, he'd replied, buying time while his brain scrambled for an answer he didn't possess. The reconciliation process involves complex mathematical frameworks that require detailed computational analysis to fully explain. It was complete nonsense. The reviewer's question had been testing whether Marcus understood the foundational physics underlying the innovation, and his response had made it clear that he didn't. I'd spent the rest of that day damage control, sending detailed technical explanations directly to the NSF team while Marcus focused on relationship management and strategic positioning. The pattern repeated itself constantly. I'd solve impossible problems, Marcus would present simplified versions to business audiences, and when technical experts asked probing questions, I'd provide anonymous support while he maintained his position as the public face of our innovations. The most painful aspect was watching opportunities for recognition slip away because I wasn't allowed to speak for myself. IEEE had invited Rodriguez Strategic Technologies to submit a keynote proposal for their annual quantum computing conference. It would have been the perfect platform to present my error correction breakthrough to the people who could best understand and build upon it. But Marcus had declined the invitation. Conference presentations are too academic, he'd explained. They don't generate revenue or attract investors. We need to focus on commercial applications, not theoretical discussions with other researchers. I'd watched from the sidelines as competing research teams presented incremental advances, while my revolutionary breakthrough remained hidden in technical reports that Marcus considered too complex for public consumption. Other researchers were building careers and reputations by solving problems I'd already solved, simply because I wasn't allowed to claim credit for my own work. The Home Office was filled with evidence of this invisible labor. File cabinets contained thousands of pages of research notes, mathematical proofs, and algorithmic innovations that had never been publicly attributed to me. Whiteboards covered with my equations served as backdrops for Marcus's video calls with clients, my work literally forming the foundation for his professional image. Late at night, when Marcus was asleep and the house was quiet, I'd sometimes sit in that office and imagine what my career might have looked like if I'd never met him. I pictured myself presenting at conferences, leading research teams, building technologies that carried my name rather than serving as the invisible foundation for someone else's reputation. The tragedy wasn't just that Marcus had taken credit for my work. The tragedy was that I'd participated in my own erasure so completely that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be recognized for my own achievements. I'd become so accustomed to creating innovations in isolation that the idea of public acknowledgement felt foreign, almost frightening. But holding Victoria Chen's business card, I was beginning to remember what it felt like to be seen as more than a support system. For the first time in years, someone with real power in our industry had looked at my work and seen not just technical competence, but leadership potential. The woman who had been developing world-changing technologies in a converted garage was being offered the chance to lead a quantum computing division with unlimited resources and international recognition. All I had to do was find the courage to step out of the shadows I'd been hiding in for so long that I'd almost forgotten they weren't permanent. Monday morning arrived with the weight of possibility. I sat at our kitchen table, Victoria's business card propped against my coffee mug like a small monument to the future I was too afraid to claim. Marcus was upstairs getting ready for what he'd described as the most important week of my career, blissfully unaware that his wife was contemplating a decision that would shatter everything he thought he knew about our relationship. My phone buzzed at exactly 7:30 a.m. Marcus's assistant, confirming his 9 a.m. meeting with the Quantum Dynamics Corporation, a startup that was developing next-generation encryption solutions for financial institutions. It was exactly the kind of client that Rodriguez Strategic Technologies had built its reputation serving, companies that needed cutting-edge cryptographic solutions but lacked the internal expertise to develop them. "Elena," Marcus called from upstairs, "can you put together a briefing on post-quantum cryptography? QDC is asking about migration strategies for legacy systems." Post-quantum cryptography. The field I'd essentially created through 5 years of research into algorithms that could resist attacks from quantum computers. I'd published the foundational papers, developed the mathematical frameworks, and created the implementation protocols that were becoming industry standards. But Marcus needed a briefing because he was going to present my life's work as his latest innovation. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, where Marcus was adjusting his tie in front of the mirror, practicing the confident smile that had charmed countless investors over the years. QDC specifically mentioned concerns about lattice-based cryptographic vulnerabilities, he continued, not looking at me as he spoke. They want to understand our approach to hybrid classical quantum-resistant systems. Every word he'd just spoken represented months of my research. Lattice-based cryptography had been my doctoral focus. Hybrid classical quantum-resistant systems were protocols I developed specifically to address the transition period when quantum computers would be powerful enough to break current encryption, but not yet stable enough to implement purely quantum solutions. "I can have something ready by this afternoon," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Actually," Marcus turned to face me, his expression carrying that familiar mixture of expectation and entitlement, "I was thinking you could come with me to the meeting. Not to present, obviously. You know how you get nervous with clients, but you could sit in and help with any technical questions that come up." Help with technical questions, meaning he wanted me there as his personal technical dictionary, ready to whisper correct answers when his surface-level knowledge proved inadequate. I'd played this role dozens of times over the years, sitting quietly in meetings while Marcus claimed credit for innovations I'd created, occasionally catching his eye when he needed rescue from questions he couldn't answer. "I'm not sure that's necessary," I said carefully. "You've presented this material before." "Elena, this is QDC. They're backed by Goldman Sachs, and they're looking for a primary technology partner for a $50 million infrastructure overhaul. If we land this contract, it could triple our revenue." Marcus's voice carried the intensity that appeared whenever he sensed a career-defining opportunity. "I need you there. You make me better. You make me brilliant. Not your expertise is valuable, but you make me better." I was a performance enhancement tool, a way for Marcus to appear more knowledgeable than he actually was. "Marcus," I began, then stopped. "How do you tell your husband of 8 years that you're tired of being his intellectual ghostwriter? How do you explain that watching him present your life's work to clients who will never know your name feels like attending your own funeral?" "What is it?" he asked, finally giving me his full attention. I looked at him standing there in his expensive suit, radiating the confidence that came from never doubting that he deserved credit for achievements he'd never actually accomplished. For a moment, I considered telling him about Victoria's offer, about the chance to finally step into the light I'd been generating from the shadows. But something held me back. Maybe it was 8 years of learned caution, or the ingrained habit of protecting Marcus from uncomfortable truths. Maybe it was the knowledge that this conversation would irrevocably change everything between us, and I wasn't quite ready for that earthquake. "Nothing," I said finally. "I'll be ready by 8:30. 2 hours later, I sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's Tesla as we drove toward downtown San Francisco, a leather portfolio on my lap containing 40 pages of technical analysis that would be presented under his name. The briefing document I'd prepared was comprehensive enough to impress the most demanding technical reviewers, covering everything from mathematical foundations to practical implementation strategies. "This is incredible work," Marcus said, glancing through the materials while stopped at a red light. "The section on hybrid protocol architectures is exactly what they're looking for. You've really outdone yourself this time." Outdone myself? As if creating revolutionary cryptographic solutions was some kind of hobby I pursued for his benefit, rather than the professional expertise I'd spent decades developing. As we pulled into the parking garage beneath QDC's headquarters, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. This would be the last time I sat silently while Marcus presented my work as his own. Whether I accepted Victoria's offer or found some other path forward, I was done being an anonymous contributor to someone else's success story. The woman walking into that meeting was still playing the role of supportive wife and technical assistant, but the woman who would emerge from it would be someone entirely different. I just had to find the courage to let her speak. The QDC meeting was a masterclass in professional humiliation disguised as collaboration. I sat in the corner of their glass-walled conference room, notepad in hand like a secretary taking minutes, while Marcus presented my post-quantum cryptography research to a table of executives who hung on his every word. "The beauty of our hybrid approach," Marcus explained, gesturing toward slides I'd created the night before, "is that it provides seamless transition protocols while maintaining backward compatibility with existing infrastructure." David Chen, QDC's chief technology officer, leaned forward with obvious interest.
That's exactly what we've been looking for. Can you walk us through the mathematical basis for the security proofs? I watched the familiar flicker of panic cross Marcus's face. Security proofs required understanding advanced mathematical concepts that took years to master. The proofs for my hybrid protocols involved complex number theory and algebraic structures that I'd spent months perfecting. Well, Marcus began, buying time while his brain searched for an answer he didn't possess. But this time, something inside me rebelled against the familiar script. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the room with unexpected clarity, the security proofs are based on the computational difficulty of lattice reduction problems in high-dimensional spaces. Every head in the room turned toward Marcus. Marcus's face went pale as I continued speaking with the authority of someone who had actually developed the mathematics being discussed. The hybrid protocols leverage both classical discrete logarithm assumptions and post-quantum lattice-based constructions, I explained, moving from my corner seat to the presentation screen. This dual foundation ensures security against both current computational attacks and future quantum threats. David Chen's eyebrows rose with genuine interest. That's brilliant. How do you handle the key exchange protocols during the transition period? For the next 20 minutes, I found myself leading a technical discussion that Marcus couldn't follow, let alone participate in. I explained the mathematical frameworks, answered detailed questions about implementation challenges, and outlined optimization strategies that had taken me years to develop. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, watching his wife demonstrate expertise that completely eclipsed his superficial understanding of the field he claimed to lead.
Dr. Rodriguez, David Chen said as the meeting concluded, his tone carrying newfound respect, your technical insights are exactly what we need for this project. Would you be available for follow-up discussions about implementation details? Dr. Rodriguez. He'd instinctively recognized my expertise and addressed me with the title Marcus had spent years helping me forget I'd earned. I glanced at Marcus, who looked like he'd just watched his entire professional identity crumble in real time. I'll need to check my schedule. The drive home was conducted in tense silence. Marcus gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles while I stared out the window, processing what had just happened. For 20 minutes, I'd spoken in my own voice, claimed my own expertise, and been recognized as the technical authority I'd always been. It felt terrifying, exhilarating, and absolutely right. What the hell was that? Marcus finally exploded as we pulled into our driveway. You completely undermined me in there. I looked like an idiot. You asked me to come for technical support, I replied calmly. They asked technical questions. I answered them. That's not how this works, Elena. You know the dynamic. I handle client relationships. You provide background support. You don't just take over presentations. The dynamic, our carefully constructed system where my expertise remained invisible while his presentation skills took center stage. The arrangement that had built his career on the foundation of my knowledge while ensuring I remained permanently in the shadows. Maybe it's time to reconsider the dynamic, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake I was creating. That evening, while Marcus made angry phone calls to business associates about partnership challenges and communication boundaries, I retreated to the home office and did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and began crafting my own proposal. Not a technical briefing for Marcus to present, not background research to support someone else's presentation, my own comprehensive proposal for QDC's infrastructure overhaul, written in my voice, showcasing my expertise, carrying my name as the primary architect. I worked until 3 a.m., pouring 8 years of suppressed knowledge and creativity into a document that represented everything I'd learned about post-quantum cryptography. The proposal included innovations I'd never shared with Marcus, breakthrough protocols I'd developed in my private research time, solutions to problems that the industry hadn't even recognized yet. When I finished, I had created something extraordinary, a complete technical framework that could revolutionize how financial institutions approached quantum-resistant security. It was the kind of proposal that could establish whoever presented it as the leading authority in post-quantum cryptography. The question was, who would present it? For 8 years, I'd handed my innovations to Marcus and watched him transform them into his success stories. But as I saved the document under my own name and prepared detailed presentation slides that showcased my unique expertise, I realized I was done being a ghostwriter in my own professional life. Tuesday morning, I picked up my phone and dialed Victoria Chen's direct number. Victoria, this is Elena Rodriguez. I'd like to discuss that position we talked about. Dr. Rodriguez. Victoria's voice carried warmth and something that sounded like relief. I was hoping you'd call. Are you ready to stop hiding your brilliance behind someone else's ambition? As I looked toward the main house, where Marcus was probably preparing for another day of presenting innovations he'd never created, I realized the answer was finally, unequivocally, yes. I'm ready, I said, but first, there's something I need to do. Victoria's corner office on the 42nd floor of the Nexus Technologies Tower overlooked the entire San Francisco Bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a view that spoke of power, influence, and the kind of success that came from making decisions that shaped entire industries. I sat across from her mahogany desk, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from trembling, while she reviewed the proposal I'd spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting. "This is extraordinary work, Dr. Rodriguez," she said, her eyes moving across pages of mathematical proofs and technical specifications that represented the culmination of my career in quantum cryptography. "Your approach to hybrid protocol implementation solves problems that companies like QDC have been struggling with for years." "Thank you," I managed, though my voice sounded foreign even to my own ears. After 8 years of having my expertise filtered through Marcus's presentations, speaking directly about my own work felt like using muscles I'd forgotten I possessed. Victoria closed the proposal and studied me with the kind of penetrating gaze that had built her reputation as one of Silicon Valley's most formidable CEOs. "Before we discuss the position I'm offering, I need to ask you something directly. Are you prepared to walk away from Rodriguez Strategic Technologies?" The question hung in the air like a bridge I either had to cross or burn. Walking away meant abandoning the company I'd helped build with my invisible labor. It meant acknowledging that 8 years of supporting Marcus's ambitions had been time invested in someone else's dream rather than my own. "I don't know," I admitted. "Rodriguez Strategic it's complicated." "Complicated how?" I took a breath, knowing that honesty would make this conversation irreversible. "Because every innovation that built that company came from my research. Every technical breakthrough that established Marcus's reputation came from algorithms I developed. Every client relationship exists because I solved problems they couldn't solve themselves." Victoria nodded as if she'd suspected as much. "And yet, your name appears nowhere on the company's public materials. Your expertise isn't acknowledged in any of their marketing. You're listed as administrative support in their corporate directory." The words hit like physical blows because they were absolutely true. I checked the company website that morning, seeing Marcus's biography prominently featured, while I existed nowhere in their public narrative. The woman whose research had generated millions in revenue was invisible to anyone researching Rodriguez Strategic Technologies. "Dr. Rodriguez," Victoria continued, her voice gentle but firm, "I've built my career on recognizing exceptional talent, regardless of how well hidden it might be. What I saw in your proposal isn't just technical competence, it's visionary thinking that could transform our entire industry." She stood and walked to the windows overlooking the bay, her silhouette framed against the afternoon sun. "Nexus Technologies is launching the most ambitious quantum computing initiative in corporate history. We're talking about unlimited research budget, access to quantum processors that most universities can only dream of, and the opportunity to lead a team of the brightest minds in the field." My heart raced as she outlined resources that represented everything I'd ever wanted in my research career. No more working in isolation, no more having my innovations filtered through someone else's limited understanding, no more watching other people take credit for breakthroughs I'd achieved in a converted garage. The position comes with full executive authority, Victoria continued. You'd report directly to me with complete autonomy over technical decisions and research directions. Your team would include 12 PhD-level researchers, and your budget would exceed what most small countries spend on scientific research. She returned to her desk and pulled out a leather folder that looked like it contained more than just a job offer. There's something else you need to know. QDC reached out to us yesterday. They're specifically requesting you as the technical lead for their infrastructure project. My breath caught. They're requesting me? By name, Dr. Elena Rodriguez. They were so impressed with your presentation yesterday that they want to move forward exclusively with you, not Rodriguez Strategic Technologies. The irony was perfect. The meeting where Marcus had expected me to provide invisible technical support had instead established me as the recognized expert in the field. My moment of speaking in my own voice had created opportunities that 8 years of silent labor never could. Victoria, I said, my voice stronger now, if I accept this position, what happens to Rodriguez Strategic? That's not your responsibility anymore, she replied with surprising firmly. Your responsibility is to stop wasting your brilliance on someone who's spent 8 years convincing you it belongs to him. She opened the leather folder and slid a contract across the desk. Chief Technology Officer, Quantum Computing Division. Starting salary of $400,000 plus equity that could be worth millions if our research succeeds. Complete creative control over your projects, full attribution for your innovations, and the platform to finally build the career you should have had all along. I stared at the contract, seeing my name printed in bold letters at the top. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, not Mrs. Marcus Rodriguez, not administrative support, not technical consultant. My name, my title, my recognition. I need to ask you one final question, Victoria said. Are you ready to stop being someone else's hidden asset and start being the visible leader you were always meant to be? I thought about Marcus, probably at home preparing for meetings built on my research. I thought about 8 years of invisible contributions and systematically diminished identity. I thought about the woman I'd been before I learned to make herself small enough to fit into someone else's vision of success. Then I picked up the pen Victoria offered and signed my name with the kind of confidence I hadn't felt in almost a decade. When do I start? I asked. Victoria smiled like she'd just won the most important negotiation of her career. How about right now? I arrived home at 6:30 p.m., carrying a leather briefcase that contained everything I needed to start my new life. Contract documents, security badges, and a company phone that would connect me to resources I'd only dreamed of accessing. The house felt different as I walked through the front door, as if I was seeing it through the eyes of someone who no longer belonged there. Marcus was in the living room, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying the frustrated edge that appeared whenever business wasn't going according to plan. No, Henderson, I understand your concerns, but I can assure you that our technical capabilities remain absolutely solid, he was saying, his free hand gesturing emphatically even though the caller couldn't see him. The QDC presentation was just a minor communication issue, nothing that affects our core competencies. Communication issue. That's how he was characterizing yesterday's meeting where I demonstrated expertise that completely overshadowed his superficial knowledge of quantum cryptography. Yes, Dr. Rodriguez will continue to be available for technical consultation, Marcus continued, catching my eye as I entered the room. She's an excellent support resource. Support resource. Even while trying to salvage client relationships, he couldn't acknowledge me as anything more than a tool for enhancing his presentations. I set my briefcase down quietly and waited for him to finish the call. When he hung up, his expression carried the mixture of frustration and accusation that had become familiar over the past 2 days. Elena, we need to talk, Marcus said, his tone suggesting that I was about to be lectured about professional boundaries and appropriate behavior. The QDC situation has created some complications. What kind of complications? They're asking to work directly with you, not through Rodriguez Strategic, not as part of our standard client engagement model. They want you personally leading their technical implementation. Marcus's voice carried disbelief, as if the idea of clients preferring my expertise to his business management was incomprehensible. And that's a problem because? Because that's not how we operate, Elena. Our business model depends on integrated service delivery. I handle strategy and client relationships. You provide technical support. If clients start thinking they can bypass me and work directly with you, it undermines everything we've built. Everything we've built. The phrase was so loaded with irony that I almost laughed. We hadn't built anything together. I had created innovations while he had claimed credit for them. I had solved impossible problems while he had presented simplified versions to audiences who didn't know the difference. Marcus, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I've been offered another position. His confident expression flickered. Another position? What do you mean? Victoria Chen offered me the role of Chief Technology Officer at Nexus Technologies. I accepted. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Marcus stared at me as if I'd just announced that I was joining the circus or moving to Mars, something so far outside his conception of reality that his brain couldn't process it. You what? His voice was barely above a whisper. I'm going to be heading their quantum computing division, full research team, unlimited budget, complete creative control over my projects. Marcus sank into his leather armchair, the same chair where he'd planned countless presentations based on my research, where he'd practiced speeches that would earn him recognition for innovations he'd never created. Elena, this is insane. You can't just abandon everything we've worked for. What have we worked for, Marcus? The question came out sharper than I'd intended, 8 years of suppressed frustration finally finding a voice. What exactly have I been working for? Our future, our company, our shared success. Whose name is on the incorporation papers as CEO? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. We both knew the answer. Whose name appears on all the patents we filed? Another silence. Whose name is featured on the company website, in industry publications, in conference speaker biographies? Elena, you know why. I know that for 8 years, I've been the invisible engine driving your visible success, I interrupted, my voice growing stronger with each word. I know that I've created every technical innovation Rodriguez Strategic has ever claimed. I know that you've built your entire reputation on research I conducted while you played golf with clients. Marcus's face was cycling through emotions like a broken kaleidoscope, confusion, denial, anger, and something that might have been recognition creeping around the edges. But this company is our company, he insisted, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. No, Marcus, this company is your company that happens to be powered by my brain, and I'm tired of being a power source for someone else's ambitions. I picked up my briefcase and headed toward the stairs. I start Monday morning. I'll be moving my research materials out of the office this weekend. Elena, wait. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. You can't do this. What about us? What about our marriage? I paused at the bottom of the staircase, looking back at the man who had spent 8 years systematically erasing my professional identity while convincing me it was for our mutual benefit. I don't know, Marcus. I honestly don't know. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I could hear him making frantic phone calls, probably trying to figure out how Rodriguez Strategic Technologies would survive without the technical expertise that had always been its foundation. But for the first time in 8 years, that wasn't my problem to solve. The woman walking up those stairs was no longer Marcus Rodriguez's support resource. She was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Chief Technology Officer, about to reclaim the career she'd been building in shadows for far too long. And she was terrifying, exhilarating, and completely, authentically herself. Monday morning at Nexus Technologies felt like stepping into a different universe. The quantum computing laboratory occupied an entire floor of the building, featuring equipment that represented the cutting edge of computational physics. Quantum processors cooled to temperatures colder than outer space, laser systems that could manipulate individual photons, and computational arrays that could perform calculations impossible on classical computers. Dr. Rodriguez, Jennifer Walsh, my new executive assistant, appeared at my elbow as I stood in the laboratory doorway, still processing the magnitude of resources now at my disposal. Your team is assembled in Conference Room A for the introductory meeting. My team, 12 PhD-level researchers who would be working under my direction, implementing my vision, building upon my innovations. After 8 years of working in isolation, the concept of collaborative research felt almost foreign. The conference room was filled with faces I recognized from academic journals and research publications. Dr. Sarah Kim from UC Berkeley, whose work on quantum error correction had influenced my own research. Dr. Michael Torres from Stanford, who had developed breakthrough protocols for quantum key distribution. Dr. Amanda Chen from MIT, whose doctoral thesis on lattice-based cryptography had cited my published papers multiple times. These weren't just researchers. They were brilliant minds who had chosen to join my team specifically because of my reputation in the field. People who knew my work, not through Marcus's filtered presentations, but through my actual publications and contributions to quantum computing research. Thank you all for joining the Quantum Computing Division, I began, my voice carrying an authority I hadn't used in professional settings for almost a decade. I moved to the whiteboard and began sketching the mathematical frameworks that would guide our research priorities. Our primary objective is developing practical, quantum-resistant cryptographic systems that can protect data in the post-quantum era. This isn't theoretical research. We're building solutions that will safeguard global communications infrastructure within the next 5 years. Dr. Kim leaned forward with obvious enthusiasm. Dr. Rodriguez, your recent paper on hybrid classical quantum protocols solved problems our entire department had been struggling with. How do you envision scaling those solutions for enterprise-level implementation? The question was exactly the kind of technical inquiry that Marcus would have deflected or answered with meaningless buzzwords. But these were my algorithms, my protocols, my mathematical innovations. I could discuss every aspect of their development because I had lived through every breakthrough and solved every challenge myself.
For the next 2 hours, I led the most intellectually stimulating conversation I'd had in years. We discussed optimization strategies, explored theoretical limitations, and planned research directions that could revolutionize how the world approached cybersecurity. My team asked probing questions that demonstrated their deep understanding of the field, and I found myself energized by collaborating with minds that could enhance and expand upon my innovations. Dr. Rodriguez. Dr. Torres said as the meeting concluded, I have to say after reading your publications I expected brilliance, but seeing you translate theoretical frameworks into practical implementation strategies in real time is extraordinary. Recognition for my actual capabilities, acknowledgement of expertise that had been systematically hidden for 8 years. I felt like a musician who had been forced to play silently, suddenly being invited to perform with a world-class orchestra. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Alina, we need to discuss transition planning. Henderson Group is threatening to cancel their contract unless you remain available for technical consultation. Please call me. I deleted the message without responding. Rodriguez Strategic Technologies client relationships were no longer my responsibility. The problems Marcus faced trying to explain technical concepts he'd never mastered weren't mine to solve anymore. That afternoon, Victoria Chen stopped by my new office, a corner space with views of the bay and enough room for the kind of collaborative work that had been impossible in my converted garage laboratory. How was your first day as CTO? Victoria asked, settling into one of the chairs facing my desk. Overwhelming and perfect, I admitted. I'd forgotten what it felt like to speak about my work without having to translate it into someone else's limited vocabulary. Victoria smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had made an excellent strategic decision. The QDC contract is official, by the way. $50 million for quantum-resistant infrastructure implementation, with you as the technical lead. They specifically requested that Rodriguez Strategic Technologies not be involved in any capacity. The irony was profound. The client relationship that Marcus had considered crucial to his career success was now exclusively mine, built on recognition of expertise he'd spent years trying to claim as his own. There's something else, Victoria continued. IBM has reached out about a potential collaboration on quantum error correction research. Google is interested in licensing your hybrid protocols. And the National Security Agency wants to discuss applications of your lattice-based cryptographic innovations. Each opportunity represented the kind of recognition that should have come years ago, acknowledgement of innovations that had been hidden behind Marcus's presentations and filtered through his superficial understanding of concepts I'd developed. Dr. Rodriguez, Victoria said, her tone carrying the weight of someone who understood the magnitude of what was happening. You're about to become one of the most influential voices in quantum computing. Are you ready for that level of visibility? I looked out at the bay, where afternoon sunlight reflected off water that stretched toward horizons that suddenly seemed achievable rather than impossible. I've been ready for 8 years, I said. I was just waiting for permission to use my own voice. Victoria laughed. You never needed permission, you just needed to stop asking for it. As she left my office, I realized she was absolutely right. The woman staring back at me from the window reflection looked like someone I used to know, confident, ambitious, unafraid to claim space in conversations where her expertise mattered. Dr. Alina Rodriguez was finally home. 3 months into my role as CTO, I began noticing something that reminded me uncomfortably of my own past. During team meetings and collaborative sessions, I observed brilliant women consistently deferring to their male colleagues, allowing their insights to be reframed by others, and watching their contributions get attributed to more vocal team members. Dr. Lisa Park, a quantum physicist whose error correction algorithms were revolutionary, would present groundbreaking concepts only to have Dr. James Mitchell restate them with slight modifications and receive credit for the enhanced approach. Dr. Rachel Adams, whose mathematical proofs formed the foundation of our security protocols, consistently prefaced her insights with phrases like, "I might be wrong, but," while her male counterparts presented far less sophisticated ideas with absolute confidence. It was my own story playing out in real time, and I couldn't stand to watch it happen again.
Dr. Park, I said after one particularly egregious instance where her brilliant solution to quantum decoherence had been immediately improved upon by a male colleague who had simply rephrased her words, could you stay after the meeting? I'd like to discuss your research trajectory. When the conference room cleared, I closed the door and sat across from a woman whose talent was being systematically minimized by her own learned deference. Lisa, how long have you been allowing other people to repackage your innovations as their improvements? Her surprise was immediate and telling. I'm not sure what you mean, Dr. Rodriguez. The decoherent solution you presented 20 minutes ago was brilliant and complete. When James suggested modifications, he was essentially repeating your explanation using different terminology, yet you thanked him for enhancing your work. I watched recognition dawn in her eyes, the same painful awareness I'd experienced when Victoria first pointed out how Marcus had been claiming credit for my research. I want to implement a new protocol, I continued. All technical contributions will be formally documented with individual attribution. Meeting minutes will specify who originated which ideas, and I want you to start presenting your research directly to our external partners. Over the following weeks, I began having similar conversations with other women throughout Nexus Technologies. Dr. Sarah Chen from the Cybersecurity Division, whose intrusion detection algorithms were consistently presented by her department head as collaborative developments. Dr. Monica Rodriguez from the AI research team, whose machine learning innovations were being filtered through her male supervisor's presentations to the board. The pattern was systemic and infuriating. Brilliant women were creating breakthrough technologies while male colleagues received recognition, promotions, and speaking opportunities. I was seeing my own 8-year experience replicated across multiple departments, multiple careers, multiple lives. Victoria, I said during our weekly check-in, we need to discuss attribution practices across the entire company. I presented her with documentation I'd been quietly gathering, instances where women's contributions were systematically minimized, reframed, or claimed by others, cases where innovative solutions developed by female researchers were presented to clients and investors by male colleagues who had contributed nothing beyond presentation skills. This isn't just unfair, I explained.
It's strategically destructive. We're wasting our most innovative minds by forcing them into supporting roles while less capable people receive recognition for their work. Victoria reviewed my findings with the same intensity she brought to major business decisions. What do you recommend? Complete transparency in contribution tracking, individual attribution for all research developments, and direct client presentation opportunities for the people who actually create the innovations we're selling. She nodded slowly, implemented company-wide. If we're going to be leaders in innovation, we need to properly identify and elevate our actual innovators. The changes began immediately. Women who had been presenting their ideas through male intermediaries suddenly found themselves in direct communication with clients and investors. Researchers whose contributions had been filtered through department heads were invited to present their own work at industry conferences. The transformation was extraordinary. When brilliant minds were finally allowed to speak for themselves, the quality of our client relationships improved dramatically. Technical discussions became more substantive because they were led by people who actually understood the underlying science. Innovation accelerated because ideas were no longer being lost in translation through less qualified intermediaries. But the most satisfying change was watching women like Dr. Park discover their own voices, stop apologizing for their expertise, and claim the recognition they had always deserved. I was building something larger than my own career recovery. I was creating a system where brilliance couldn't be stolen, where recognition followed actual contribution, and where the women who generated breakthrough innovations finally received credit for their work. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other, until it wasn't. The Global Technology Leadership Summit wanted me as their keynote speaker, addressing an audience of 3,000 industry leaders about innovation attribution and the hidden architecture of technological progress.
Dr. Rodriguez, the conference director explained during our video call, your transformation from invisible contributor to recognized leader has become legendary in our industry. But more importantly, the systemic changes you've implemented at Nexus Technologies are inspiring similar reforms across Silicon Valley. Legendary. The word felt surreal applied to my own story. For 8 years, I'd been a ghost in someone else's narrative. Now, industry leaders wanted to hear about how that ghost had finally learned to speak. The keynote was scheduled for the summit's opening session, broadcast live to technology conferences around the world. As I prepared my presentation, I realized this wasn't just an opportunity to share my experience. It was a platform to expose the systemic invisibility that still plagued countless brilliant women across the industry. Standing backstage at the San Francisco Convention Center, I could hear the murmur of 3,000 voices filling the auditorium. Through a gap in the curtain, I saw an audience that represented the most powerful decision-makers in global technology: CEOs, venture capitalists, research directors, and government officials whose choices shaped the future of innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator's voice carried across the auditorium, please welcome Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Chief Technology Officer of Nexus Technologies. Walking onto that stage felt like stepping into sunlight after years in a cave. The applause was respectful, expectant, but I knew most of the audience had no idea they were about to hear a story that would challenge fundamental assumptions about how innovation actually happens in their industry. How many of you have heard of the Rodriguez cryptographic protocol? I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. Hundreds of hands went up. The protocol was famous in cybersecurity circles, a breakthrough that had revolutionized quantum-resistant encryption and generated millions in licensing revenue. How many of you know who actually developed it? Far fewer hands remained raised. I could see confusion rippling through the audience as they began to understand that this keynote wasn't going to follow the typical format of celebrating obvious achievements. The Rodriguez protocol was developed by Dr. E.M. Rodriguez, I continued, letting the silence stretch as recognition dawned on faces throughout the auditorium. That's me. But for years, it was presented to clients, investors, and industry conferences by my former husband, who understood neither the mathematics that made it possible nor the innovations that made it revolutionary. The auditorium had gone completely silent. I was watching 3,000 powerful people confront the possibility that their industry's attribution systems were fundamentally broken. I told them about 8 years of invisible labor, about brilliant innovations filtered through superficial understanding, about watching my life's work get claimed by someone whose only contribution was confidence and networking ability. But more importantly, I told them about what I'd discovered since joining Nexus Technologies. The systematic invisibility of female innovators isn't an anomaly, I explained, clicking to slides that displayed research I'd conducted across multiple technology companies. It's endemic. In survey after survey, we find brilliant women creating breakthrough technologies while male colleagues receive recognition, promotions, and speaking opportunities. I presented case studies from companies across Silicon Valley, anonymized, but detailed enough to show the scope of intellectual property theft disguised as collaboration. I shared statistics about patent attribution, conference speaking opportunities, and media coverage that revealed stark disparities between who created innovations and who received credit for them. This isn't just unfair, I concluded, my voice carrying the conviction of someone who had lived through both sides of this equation. It's strategically destructive. We're wasting our most innovative minds by forcing them into supporting roles while less capable people receive recognition for their work. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. But more importantly, the conversations that erupted throughout the auditorium suggested that industry leaders were finally ready to confront uncomfortable truths about how their success had been built. As I left the stage, I realized I had just done something that would have been impossible during my invisible years. I had used my own voice to speak truth to power, and power had listened. The response to my keynote was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours of the summit broadcast, my phone was buzzing with messages from women across the technology industry who had watched their own stories reflected in my presentation.
Dr. Rodriguez, your speech gave me the courage to finally speak up, wrote Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a biotech researcher whose gene therapy innovations had been systematically attributed to her male supervisor for 6 years. I'm meeting with my company's board tomorrow to discuss proper attribution for my work. The messages kept coming. Dr. Sarah Kim from Google, whose machine learning algorithms had revolutionized search functionality while her department head received recognition at industry conferences. Dr. Amanda Torres from Microsoft, whose cybersecurity protocols protected millions of users while her contributions remained buried in technical documentation that executives never read. Each story followed the same devastating pattern: brilliant women creating breakthrough innovations while male colleagues received credit, promotions, and public recognition. My experience at Rodriguez Strategic Technologies hadn't been unique, it had been typical. But something was shifting. The keynote had apparently triggered conversations in boardrooms across Silicon Valley about attribution practices, intellectual property recognition, and the systematic invisibility of female innovators. Victoria Chen forwarded me an article from TechCrunch with the headline, "The Rodriguez Effect: How One Woman's Story is Exposing Silicon Valley's Attribution Crisis." The impact is spreading faster than we anticipated, Victoria told me during our emergency meeting that afternoon. I've received calls from 12 major technology companies asking about implementing similar attribution protocols. Stanford is launching a research study on innovation theft in academic corporate partnerships, and the National Science Foundation wants to discuss policy changes for grant attribution. My personal story was becoming a movement. Women who had spent years accepting intellectual invisibility were finally demanding recognition for their contributions. Companies that had built reputations on stolen innovations were facing uncomfortable questions about their actual sources of breakthrough technologies. The most satisfying message came from QDC's board of directors. Dr. Rodriguez, we wanted you to know that your keynote prompted a comprehensive review of our internal attribution practices.
We discovered several instances where female researchers' contributions had been systematically minimized. We're implementing immediate policy changes and would like to discuss expanding our partnership with Nexus Technologies. But the response wasn't entirely positive. Marcus had apparently watched the keynote broadcast and was fielding angry calls from clients and partners who were reevaluating their relationships with Rodriguez Strategic Technologies. According to mutual contacts in the industry, several major contracts had been terminated as clients realized that the technical expertise they'd been paying for no longer existed within his company. The Henderson Group dropped Rodriguez Strategic this morning, Dr. Torres informed me after running into Marcus at an industry networking event. Apparently, they asked him to explain the mathematical basis for quantum error correction protocols, and he couldn't answer basic questions about concepts you'd developed years ago. The revelation was both devastating and perfectly predictable. Without my invisible labor supporting his presentations, Marcus was being exposed as someone whose technical understanding had never matched his confident public persona. 3 days after my keynote, I received a call that crystallized just how far the ripple effects had spread. Dr. Rodriguez, this is Janet Morrison from the Congressional Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, the voice said. We're launching an investigation into attribution practices in federally funded research. Your presentation has raised serious questions about whether taxpayer-funded innovations are being properly credited to their actual creators. Congressional investigation. My personal story of reclaimed identity had become a federal policy issue. The woman who had spent 8 years accepting systematic invisibility had inadvertently exposed a problem so widespread that it required government intervention to address. As I hung up the phone, I realized that speaking my truth hadn't just freed me from Marcus's shadow. It had illuminated shadows where countless other brilliant women had been hidden, and given them permission to finally step into their own light. The revolution I'd started by simply refusing to remain invisible was spreading far beyond anything I'd imagined possible. 6 months after my keynote, Marcus appeared at my office looking like a man who had aged years in the span of weeks. Rodriguez Strategic Technologies had folded the previous month, unable to survive once clients realized that the technical expertise they'd been paying for had never actually belonged to the company's founder.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.